Marcus Aurelius lost at least 8 of his children. A plague emptied entire cities of his empire. His most trusted general declared himself emperor behind his back. None of it was his choice. None of it asked his permission. And yet, in the private notebook he kept for himself alone, never meant for publication, never meant for us, he kept returning to a single, almost absurdly simple idea. One he had first encountered as a young man reading the freed slave and philosopher Epictetus. Some things are up to you, and some things are not. And almost everything that ruins a life comes from confusing the two. Today we're going to walk through what Marcus Aurelius actually meant by that line, the only real distinction he thought was worth spending a life learning, and why so much of what exhausts you right now is something you were never in charge of to begin with. Marcus did not invent this idea. He inherited it, studied it as a teenager under a Stoic tutor, and carried a copy of Epictetus's teachings with him on military campaign for the rest of his life. But he did something Epictetus never got the chance to do. He tested it under the worst conditions the ancient world could produce, as the most powerful man alive, with no excuse and nowhere to hide from whether it actually worked. Epictetus taught the idea from a lecture hall, to students who could nod along and go home to ordinary lives. Marcus had no home to go back to. The empire was the home, and the empire was exactly where the plague, the war, and the betrayals kept arriving. That is what makes meditations different from a philosophy lecture. It's a man checking, night after night, whether a principle still holds up against his actual life, and writing down the answer even when the answer was uncomfortable. 1. The line that splits everything. Epictetus had put it as plainly as language allows. Of things, some are in our power, and others are not. In our power are opinion, movement towards a thing, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own acts. Marcus copied that line into his own notebook so often that it became the spine of everything else he wrote. Notice what it does not say. It does not say you have power over what happens to you. It says you have power over your own acts and opinions. Full stop. No exceptions. Nothing else on the list. Everything else, other people's choices, the weather, the market, your body's health, whether the plague reaches your city, whether your general stays loyal, sits on the other side of the line, in the category the Stoics simply called, not up to us. This sounds almost too clean to be useful, and that's exactly why most people skim past it. But sit with what it actually removes. If your peace depends on your opinion of the event, not the event itself, then no external catastrophe can reach it without your cooperation. Picture 2 officers receiving the same order to retreat. One spends the night raging at the enemy, at fate, at the general who gave the order. The other accepts the order as data, checks what is actually his to do next, and sleeps. Same retreat, same night. One man is at war with the world. The other is only at war with the part of it that was ever his. This is not a small distinction hiding in an old book. It is the entire architecture of a calm life versus an exhausting one. Almost every source of chronic frustration you can name, if you trace it back far enough, turns out to be the same thing. A person quietly trying to control something that was never on their side of the line. Another driver's patience, a stranger's opinion, the outcome of a decision that already happened. Marcus is not telling you to stop caring about those things. He is telling you to stop mistaking them for your job. 2. Your body was never fully yours. This is the wall most people refuse to believe, because it sounds like it can't be true for an emperor. Surely the most powerful man on earth controlled his own health. He did not. Marcus suffered from chest pains and stomach illness for most of his adult life, badly enough that historians still argue about what chronic condition he was quietly managing while running an empire. He never treats this as a contradiction of the theory. He treats it as the theory's first and hardest test case. Your body gets sick, ages, weakens, and eventually dies regardless of your intentions. None of that was ever up to you, and the way your judgment about it is up to you. Marcus draws the distinction with almost clinical precision. Illness is an impediment to the body, not to the will, unless the will consents to be impeded. Think of 2 people receiving the identical diagnosis in the same week. One experiences it as the end of the story. The other experiences it as new information about which parts of the day are still theirs to spend, and goes looking for those parts immediately. The disease does not care which response you choose, but you will live very different remaining years depending on which one you pick. Marcus wrote to himself as if he needed the reminder daily, because he did. The body is on loan, borrowed material, arranged for you, and reclaimed on a schedule you were never given in advance. Panicking about the schedule does not change it. It only spends the hours you were actually given panicking instead of living them. 3. Reputation is a loan, not a possession. Marcus governed an empire where every decision was second-guessed by senators, mocked by pamphleteers, and gossiped about in the forum before sundown. He could not control a single word anyone said about him, and he tells himself, over and over, to stop trying to. In one of his sharpest lines, he notes, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." Notice the move. He does not say defend your reputation as a good man. He says become one, and let the argument about your reputation belong to other people, because it was always theirs to have, not yours to win. What other people think of you happens entirely inside their own minds, built from their own history, their own mood that day, their own reasons that have nothing to do with you. You can influence it a little through your actions, but you cannot own it, finalize it, or force it to match the truth. Think of the last time someone misjudged you unfairly, and how long you spent afterward rehearsing the version of the conversation where you finally set them straight. That rehearsal is you trying to operate a lever that was never actually connected to anything. The only lever in the room that was ever yours was your own next action. Marcus had it worse than almost anyone reading this ever will. An entire empire of strangers held opinions about him, most of whom he would never meet and could never correct. His conclusion was not that reputation doesn't matter. It was that chasing it directly is a losing game, because you are trying to steer a boat from the dock instead of the deck. Character, built quietly and repeated daily, was the only version of a good name he ever found that didn't require anyone else's cooperation to exist. 4. The judgment is the only real lever. Here is where the whole teaching sharpens into something almost uncomfortably practical. Marcus writes, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Not the event, your estimate of the event. That word, revoke, is doing enormous work. It means the judgment is not a fact that happened to you. It is a decision you made, and decisions can be unmade by the same person who made them. A senator insults him at court. The plague reaches another province. A courier arrives with news of another defection. None of these events carry a verdict stamped on them at the factory. The verdict gets added afterward, by Marcus, in the half-second between the news arriving and his reaction to it. And that half-second, and only that half-second, was ever his territory to defend. Most people spend their entire lives trying to control the news instead of the half-second, which is exactly backward, because the news was never available to control in the first place. This is also the part of the teaching that gets misunderstood as denial, and it is worth being precise about what Marcus is not saying. He is not saying pretend the plague isn't a tragedy, or that a betrayal doesn't hurt. He is saying the raw fact and your verdict on the raw fact are two separate events happening a half-second apart, and only the second one is a door you can walk back through. Grief can be honest and still be undramatized. Loss can be real and still not be catastrophized into something larger than it is. 5. What this actually frees you to do. This is the part people misread as coldness, and it is the opposite of coldness. Giving up the illusion that you control outcomes does not mean giving up on effort. Marcus commanded armies, wrote laws, and worked from dawn until exhaustion every single day of his reign. What it frees you from is the specific, corrosive anxiety of gripping an outcome you were never going to be able to hold on to anyway. He puts effort entirely inside the category of things that are up to him, the trying, the discipline, the honest work, and lets the results, which were never his, fall wherever they were always going to fall. A general prepares his legion, studies the terrain, commands with everything he has, and still cannot guarantee the battle's outcome once it starts, because an outcome is built from 1,000 choices that are not his to make. What was entirely his was the preparation. This is not resignation. It is where he puts 100% of his energy, instead of splitting it between the part of the fight he can actually win and the part that was never a fight to begin with. Most people run on a kind of divided attention their whole lives. Half their energy on the actual work in front of them, half on anxiously watching an outcome that no amount of watching can change. Marcus's version of discipline was closing that second half down entirely and discovering that the work left over was somehow easier to do, not because the stakes were lower, but because he was finally only fighting one battle instead of two. So the next time something goes wrong today, a plan falls through, a person disappoints you, a diagnosis arrives, Marcus would ask you one question before any other. Is this thing itself the problem? Or is it the sentence you are about to write underneath it? He spent an empire's worth of grief, illness, and betrayal discovering the same answer over and over, in a tent, by lamplight, with no one watching. You were never in charge of the weather. You were only ever in charge of whether you brought a coat. Build your peace on the one piece of territory that was always actually yours, and the rest of the world, the plague, the mutiny, the 8 small graves he never stopped grieving, can rage exactly as loudly as it wants to. It was never going to be able to reach the only room that mattered. If this changed how you look at the things you keep trying to control, subscribe to Above Average, where we explore the psychology and philosophy of the thinkers who saw what most people never do. Thanks for watching.